Hi guys, welcome back. We had some interesting words a couple of weeks ago, and I want to give you more interesting words, authentic vocabulary that we use to talk about managing social care agencies. So here you are, lots of fascinating stuff this week once again, I hope. In this presentation, I want to describe different kinds of organisation, in particular, thinking of organisations providing services for the public. What different kinds of organisation do we have? Now, this is important but tricky. It's worth me noting here, you might even need to watch this video twice if anything is unclear. It really is quite complex. And if you're a German native speaker, this particular session is especially difficult for you because the German terminology and the English language terminology are so strangely different. I want to talk about a particularly well-known categorization system dividing organizations into 3 sectors. Okay, so sector is going to be one of the big words today. It's especially useful in thinking about social care or human services, so it's quite fascinating for us. Maybe it's nice to hold on to an example. Think of a nursing home. Okay, imagine we're running a nursing home. Who could run a nursing home? And to be more specific, what kind of organization could run that nursing home? Hold on to that example for the next 15 minutes. I'm going to start by asking a question. I'm going to talk today about the 3 sector typology. Do you know it? I want you to pause now and discuss it with your partner. The 3 sector typology for describing services like running a nursing home. Do we know it? Are we familiar with it? Discuss with your partner. Pause here. Well, I don't know if you do. I don't know if you do or if you don't. I'm going to try and describe it for you right now. Thinking of our nursing home, I actually worked in a nursing home. I did a placement there when I was a student, and it was lovely. There were nuns running around, and I thought, wow, how German is that? I'm really on the continent here. In Germany, of course, we find it quite natural that the church or an agency affiliated with the church runs a nursing home. I'm sure the one I ended up in was in no way unusual. Why? Germany has large welfare organizations doing a lot of the welfare, a lot of the social care. You've got Caritas, you've got Diakonie, you've got AWO, Roter Kreuz, you've got the Paritätische, you've got the Zentralwohlfahrtsstelle der Juden. You've got 6 in total that are especially big, and these have a particular status in German law as well. So you've got these big welfare organizations. Very German. Also very German, Germany is rich in small organizations. And I might ask you as students, you might be a member of a local community organization. I bet you are. If you're a typical German, I bet you are. Maybe you're a member of a tennis club or a soccer club. Maybe it's a parent-led nursery. Maybe you're a member of a singing club, for example. Again, so many people in Germany are. So we've got these big welfare organizations, but we've got loads of little community organizations as well. They have something in common. We call these organizations collectively 3rd sector organizations. So together they make up the 3rd sector. Check out 3rd sector management in your favorite online bookshop. You'll find loads of books about managing these organizations. Another question for you to scratch your heads over with your partner: what do all these organizations have in common? What is this 3rd sector? Hey, I think I went too quickly there. If you looked, you would have seen the answer already. The commonality is really quite simple. You've probably guessed 3rd sector organizations are non-profit organizations. They're non-profit organizations. Being non-profit, that's a formal status that the organization has, okay? So it formally doesn't make a profit, and that's actually a tax status. They have to clarify that status with their local tax office. We talk about it as Gemeinnützigkeit in German. Now, to make this even more confusing for you, sorry guys, it's worth noting there's other words for 3rd sector organization in the English language. We've got a whole bunch of different words. And actually there's different words in German too. We can also talk about non-profits. We can also talk about NGOs. We can also talk about voluntary sector organizations. Can you think of German expressions like these English words? I've just given you 3 nice English terms. Can you think of approximate German equivalents? Not one-to-one translations, don't forget, because that's not how language works in this complex area, but things which are somehow comparable, things which remind us of those English terms. Pause here, discuss with your partner. Yeah, did those English expressions ring any bells? Let's start with that expression non-profits, which I've just used. It's worth noting in Germany, you usually say NPO, don't you? NPO. And those 3 German letters come from a nice English expression, non-profit organisation. I think you can say not-for-profit organisation as well. I think both work just as well as the other. Please note, when we're talking in English, when we're speaking, when we're presenting, we don't normally shorten it, okay? So I wouldn't normally say NPO. I might write it, you know, if you surf the internet, you'll find it on the internet. I might write it, I don't normally say it. I've never ever heard a native speaker say NPO. The reason why not is quite clear, isn't it? It doesn't sound very nice phonetically. Even in English, NPO, it doesn't sound good, NPO. You know, if I can say non-profit, what a beautiful word phonetically, why would I say NPO? So we don't say it, but we can write it. Non-profits is short enough, sounds nice phonetically. You can also say non-profit organisation if you want to make it longer. Germans like to make things long and complex. That's what we do in Germany, isn't it? Good, good. What was my next expression? NGOs. It's worth noting there is a German word, NGO. See also, I think you can even say it, NGO. See also NRO, but, and it's a big but, guys, be careful. The German NGO or NRO is not the same as the English expression. Compare the 2 Wikipedia pages to see the difference. So if you start Googling for definitions, you'll find there's subtle differences in the definitions. I draw your attention to the fact that when we say NGO in Germany, we often mean something international. In English, it doesn't have that nuance of meaning at all. If it was an international NGO, it would be an INGO, which has nothing to do with your friend Ingo, in case you're wondering. So be careful. My point here is the English word is not quite the same as the German equivalent at first glance, okay? I'd also like to stress a second point to you guys. This expression NGO is very common. It's a very common expression in English. And in a separate video, I'll be giving you examples of this. You can enter it into the Economist search database or the Financial Times search database. You'll find so many articles using this expression. It really is common. I come across it when I read the papers every day. Often the English expression NGO is a good translation of your German NPO. I mean, my first choice would be non-profit, but if you really want a shortened expression, NGO is probably the best to use. Good, good. Moving on now, even more terms. Hey, this is quite fascinating, isn't it? It is for me. I'm a language teacher. Voluntary sector organizations. It's worth analyzing the exact meaning of this term, voluntary. Why do we say voluntary? We say voluntary, I think it comes from the Latin, because the organization is free. It's free to decide what work to do. It sets its own agenda. And I find this especially nice in Germany. You've got these welfare organizations that do lots of work. They do a lot of social care, but they also promote political ideas. You know, they're drawing attention to scandalous injustices in our society. You know, a nice example of this, you leave the train station at Vechta to come to the university, and we've got the Haus der Caritas opposite the train station. They've got these wonderful big posters drawing our attention to some kind of social issue. So something that we can really appreciate from the German context, these organizations, they choose their own agenda. They want to work in this area. They want to help these people. They're drawn to their own work. So the word voluntary is especially nice, isn't it? And the idea of them being free is also in the German translations. Look at this. We have similar expressions in German. They're not one-to-one translations, but they're very close. You can talk about freie Träger. It's a German expression which is very common. It's a little bit vague, and this is not one-to-one. This is a bit of a problematic translation. To be more precise, let's say frei gemeinnützige Träger. Frei gemeinnützige Träger. It doesn't sound pretty when you first say it, but the more you say it, the more you get used to that German expression. So that's definitely, for me, the closest German equivalent here. Please note there's other terms in German as well. In slightly old-fashioned German, it's a bit 20th century, we talk about the freie Wohlfahrtspflege. Freie Wohlfahrtspflege. Interesting, huh? From a linguistic perspective, that's quite fascinating because we also have this idea of social care in English, a very modern idea, which is strangely related to that idea of Wohlfahrtspflege. Fascinating, huh? Brits often say community and voluntary sector. It's not quite right saying that because the community sector is part of the voluntary sector, but we still say them together to make the difference clear. Again, I made the point in German, didn't I? In Germany, you may be a member of a football club, let's say, or a nursery run by the parents, okay? And these are real community organizations. So maybe it's nice to focus on the small community organizations to put them together with the larger, maybe national voluntary sector organizations. Final point, sorry guys, this is also confusing, isn't it? Volunteer, as you might know, means ehrenamtlich arbeiten. Okay, so if I'm working for no money in my local soup kitchen, I'm a volunteer, I'm volunteering, okay? Don't get confused. Most voluntary sector workers are paid. They're not volunteers. You know, so a children's home or a kindergarten, you know, there may be a work placement student, a practicant, but otherwise everybody's a normal salaried staff member. So don't be confused by that word voluntary. Don't think their workers are volunteering. Most of the workers are typically paid workers. Maybe the volunteers help out, like in my soup kitchen example. Hey, loads of words, loads of ideas, and it really is a confusing session, this one. You see what I mean about this being a tricky subject. It gets trickier, actually. Hang on in there, guys. 3 sectors. Returning to our 3 sectors concept, we've discussed the third sector. But what about the first and the second sectors? What about the other 2 sectors? We've kind of started at the end, haven't we? We should have started at the first sector, shouldn't we? Pause here and discuss with your partner. What could the first sector be? What could the second sector be? The first sector is the public sector. Public sector. We sometimes call this the statutory sector. That's an interesting word, statutory sector. Discuss with your partner. What is the statutory sector? A clue, maybe it's hidden a little bit in that word itself. Oh, another clue. Think of getting welfare, think of getting support in some way in the Nordic countries, because they have a fascinating tradition. And hang on to that nursing home example I started off this video with as well. Scratch your heads, have a pause and scratch your heads. I'm hoping you guessed, statutory simply means state. In some countries, there was a tradition that the state runs welfare services. The welfare in your town is run by your municipality. That's how it worked in many places. So a workshop for disabled people, a children's home, or our example, a nursing home for older people, they could all be run by the state. How do you translate statutory into German? Pause here and quickly scratch your heads, natter with your partner. Statutory in German? I'm hoping you guessed öffentlich would be the classic translation, wouldn't it? That'd be the sector we're talking about here. It's worth noting, in Germany, statutory agencies are much less common than in Scandinavia. In Scandinavia, lots of people work for the state. In Germany, lots of people work for third sector organizations. It's really quite fascinating. There's a lovely contrast there, which is really, really interesting. In case you're wondering, that difference goes back to the time of Bismarck. And maybe it's rooted in our German culture and their Nordic culture. This makes my next question a bit tricky, but it's worth doing anyway. Can you think of a statutory organization in German social care? Something that is normally run by the government, run by the state, run by the town municipality, and not run by an NGO, a third sector organization. Scratch your head, see if you can think of an example. Pause here. Did you come up with anything? I guess the classic example would be your German Jugendamt. Most social work is done by Caritas, Diakonie, AWO, and. But the Jugendamt really is always run by the state, always run by the municipality, the town, or the district office. So that's a nice example of statutory sector social care in Germany. There you are. And of course, you're a student at university. Our university is a state university, so we're also in the statutory sector when we're at the university. Let's move on. Let's move on. We've talked about the first sector. We've talked about the third sector. We've missed out the second sector, the last sector really that I want to talk about. What is the second sector? So we've had the state, we've had non-profits. What about the other sector? Who else offers social care services? What other organizational form do we have? Pause here, scratch your head, natter with your partner. Who else could run our imaginary nursing home? Hey, I've got an idea. As a clue, think of a luxury nursing home in Florida. You're an American, how would you like to grow old? I've got a fantasy. I want to be in a luxury nursing home and I want my midday lunch to be served with a little glass of Prosecco. And I'm going to be on my balcony, enjoying my tasty meal, enjoying my little glass of Prosecco, getting a little bit gently swished, even though it's only 12:15 in the very early afternoon. And my balcony is overlooking the sea somewhere down there in Florida. That's my fantasy. So that's to help you in your orientation. Who could run this luxury nursing home, which Magnus is in his fantasies growing old in? Did you get it? It's simple, isn't it? A for-profit business. The other sector is the sector made up of for-profit businesses. We can therefore talk about the for-profit sector, or we can call it the private sector. Please note, English native speakers find the expression for-profit sector a bit of a mouthful. Okay, private sector runs my lips more smoothly. Now it gets confusing. How do we say private sector in German? What are these private agencies? You have it. You know, there are luxury private sector nursing homes in Germany as well. What do we call them? What's the German translation of private here? Pause, natter with your partner. Did you guess, guys? It's freigewerblich. We can talk about freigewerbliche Träger. Again, it doesn't really flow from the lips, but that is what we say in German. Once again, be careful, guys. It's so confusing. English, German, it's so annoying, I know. In German, private sector can describe family welfare. Okay, so, you know, mum looks after her mother or her kids. You might describe that as being privat. We don't, okay? We call that informal care, and that's the informal sector. This is so confusing. So again, a kind of a stumbling block for you guys as German native speakers. The informal sector is not the same as the private sector, but rather, in a sense, it's almost the opposite if you think about it, you know? It really is almost the opposite. So there you are. I've outlined this categorization system. It's a kind of typology. It's used in the Anglo-Saxon countries. It is used in the German-speaking countries, but the words we use are so horribly different. So it's worth noting this is not an especially Anglo-Saxon concept. It's a little bit Anglo-Saxon, but it is used in Germany as well. The problem is our language is different. Hey, this is a specialist language course, and maybe that's why you're watching this. I've given you some book covers here, beautiful covers from books that I've been flicking through, and they look quite fascinating. I can recommend all of these books. But it's worth me closing this presentation with some final questions. And this question I want to ask now is, any criticisms? I've presented you a typology. Thinking about human services and human services management, we often use this three-sector model. Discuss with your partner, does it have any weaknesses? Could we criticize it? Could you say, oh, Magnus, that's all very well, but... Give me some buts, give me some buts. Pause here, give me some criticisms of my typology, my categorization system of three sectors. Natter with your neighbor. What did you come up with? Are there any criticisms? There are. Some people claim that we've got this model, the separate sectors model, and that worked well in the past. It worked well to help us understand organizational forms in the past, you know, maybe in the 20th century. But today, the differences between the organization's motives, you know, we work for profit, we work for the common good. That motive difference is much more complex today. Maybe I work for profit and common good. That's a, you know, real 21st century idea, isn't it? Also, organizational forms. Is it a company? Is it a charity? I was once working with disabled people, and I said to my boss, I have to ask a silly question, but is our formal organizational status, is it that of the voluntary sector charity? Is this a charity? And my boss said, actually, we're currently in a transition phase. We're changing from a charity to a charitable company. And of course, I was, you know, scratching my head. What on earth does that mean? If you're a German native speaker, of course, you've got similar concepts in German. This idea of the GmbH, Gemeinnützige GmbH. I think it's the same kind of idea as that. So we're seeing a complexity that we didn't have before. So the differences between these organizational forms are becoming a little bit blurred, a little bit unclear. We're seeing more diversity in organizational forms. Buzzwords, well, of course, in Vechta, we're really big on corporate social responsibility, right? And we've also got the idea of social entrepreneurship. So two good 21st century buzzwords to help us think about organizations in Germany, for example. And some people say instead of these separate spheres, maybe we should look at it as being some kind of spectrum. And that's a fascinating approach, which you guys can discuss and dispute. Hey, one final point. I want to teach you a bit of classical old school economics. This is sounding kind of surreal for me because I trained as a social worker, so I shouldn't be teaching classical old school economics. But let's go back to classical economics. And I think it's fair to say this theory is something like 200 years old. I have a question for you. The term third sector organization is a little confusing because we can also divide the economy into separate sectors according to dominant production in that economy. Where's the economy getting its cash? You know, how does it work in terms of goods and services being produced, being sold? Think about, I don't know, think about, I said 200 years ago, think about, say, Finland 200 years ago. Finland 200 years ago, it was like forests and agriculture. You know, they farmed and they got wood. Okay, when we talk about things like that, raw materials, agriculture, we talk about the primary sector. Okay, so economies will have a primary sector, and some economies are actually based on that primary sector. Finland 200 years ago. I don't know why I thought Finland. A nice country, though. I've got Finnish friends. Other economies are based on industrial manufacturing. And again, you know, think of Germany, we're the classic example. We make cars, we make machines, we make things, industrial manufacturing. Actually, Finland industrialized too. Sorry, I'm tongue-tied. Finland's also industrial, of course. It industrialized a little bit later than some of its neighboring countries, a little bit after Germany and Sweden, for example. So that's interesting. So we can talk about an industrial manufacturing economy. So the agriculture economies, that's the primary sector, and the industrial manufacturing, that's the secondary sector. Okay, primary, secondary. Is there a third one? Is there a tertiary sector, I hear you ask? Of course. Think about my birth country. I was born in Britain. That's a classic example of a service economy. And the service sector we call the tertiary sector. Hey, maybe that's Finland's future, actually. My kids are really into Angry Birds. Angry Birds is great, isn't it? You know, some kind of IT service. And that would be a kind of classic British economy thing as well. It's quite common for these knowledge economies. So there you are. So we've got the primary sector, agriculture, raw materials. We've got the secondary sector, industrialization, manufacturing. We've got this tertiary sector, services, but also buying and selling things. Good. Bit of old school classical economics. Is it relevant to our discussion today? You know, because we're thinking about human services, we're thinking about running social care services, running a nursing home. Has this helped us? Not really. Indeed, actually, my Finnish friends might say, hey, your example is really, really boring. If you want to talk about social care management, Finland, you know, Finland has so much welfare. It's got one of the biggest welfare states. So I've taken that country and I've actually neglected the interesting aspect of a country for us. And I've talked about a rather boring thing, economic history. Yeah, but I'm saying this for a very, very good reason. A very, very good reason. Achtung, guys, okay? Achtung, baby. This is important. Pay attention. The primary, secondary, tertiary sector model has nothing to do with today's topic, the public-private third sector model. So I know it's three, and I know it's a model, and I know we use the word sector, but sorry guys, you know, this is day and night. This is chalk and cheese. These two things are not the same. They're almost opposites, actually. Third sector does not mean services in English. Okay, it doesn't. Tertiary sector means services. If I speak German, I like to make this distinction nice and clear because I don't really find it helps to muddle it all up. So when I speak German, I say tertiäre Sektor to mean things like services, and I say dritte Sektor to talk about running NGOs. So in German, I try to separate it. On the other hand, maybe I'm doing that because I'm an Anglo-Saxon. I like to keep things clear. In German, we don't do this, okay? Not all Germans do. If a German says dritte Sektor, you don't really know what they mean. Okay, they may mean tertiary sector, they may mean third sector. Be careful, look for clarification. So a final note, and this is especially important in Vechta, you've got basic economics as part of your foundation semester 1. Be careful, when I say third sector, maybe it's not what you think, thinking in German. Hey, you can see what I mean about the complexity of all of this, but it is all worth doing. These terms that we're using here really are helpful terms. They've pushed the discipline of management forward. There's so much literature about this topic. Well done, guys, for your concentration. Tricky stuff, but worth battling with. Any questions about it, of course, you can ask me when we have our conference lesson. Thanks, guys.